Welcome back. All right, so power rankings 1 through 32. And this week, we're 1 week away from the final power rankings before the All-Star break. And so I took a look at some things today. I moved some teams around, and we'll go ahead and discuss where teams are at because there's been some big moves. There's been some big moves this week. So at number 32, and with a move downward, it is the Arizona Coyotes. So the Coyotes dropped 3 spots. They've lost 15 in a row on the road. They've lost 12 of their last 13. The Coyotes are doing a very good job of securing themselves a top draft pick this year. And keep in mind, we talk a lot about Bedard, but this is considered to be a pretty deep draft. So any of the top 3, top 4, you're going to be getting a pretty good player in all likelihood. There are no guarantees. I know there's no guarantees, but pretty good odds, really. And so, yeah, Arizona ends up 32nd this week. Number 31, same spot as last week, is Columbus. So Columbus was residing at 32nd, but they end up 31st, again, because of the basic just sheer ineptitude of the Arizona Coyotes at this point. Puts the Columbus Blue Jackets up to 31st. So Columbus, they get a victory today over San Jose. They move up to 14 wins. There are some teams at 14 wins, including Arizona. That seems to be the key number right now for teams that are bombing out and basically just looking forward to the draft right now. Number 30. Same spot as last week as well. The Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks, 30th on the board. And so for Anaheim, going through the motions, they had a win over Columbus yesterday. Columbus beat San Jose. It's just fun to see these teams that are at the bottom of the league all playing against one another. They're usually fun games. They're usually enjoyable because you have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea who's going to win because they're teams that don't generally win. So for Anaheim, they're playing well enough that I don't think they belong at the very bottom of the board, which is a little bit surprising. But at any rate, yeah, they're 30th this week. Number 29, moving up 3 spots from last week, Chicago. So the Chicago Blackhawks have had a really solid January, to the surprise of, I would think, probably everybody. That being said, of course, they're so far out of it at this stage that even having a good month isn't enough to have them considering trying to salvage anything this year. We're going to start seeing guys getting moved. I don't know if it's going to happen before the All-Star break. I would have thought it would have started already, but at this point, while trade talks are picking up, and I heard that a lot this week, what does that mean? Does that mean they're calling 4 or 5 times a day? Does that mean that, the offers are better? Does that mean that, teams are dropping down what their asking price is? It's just such a vague term that you won't hear it from me very much when I'm doing news videos because, again, it's all noise until the trade takes place. But Chicago is going to be a team to watch at the deadline, obviously. Number 28, dropping 1 spot from last week, is Vancouver. So Vancouver's found themselves now down, lingering in this area. And again, I mentioned this in a recent video, that their remaining schedule is considered kind of easy. So there's some concern that maybe they'll win too many of their games. I don't have that concern. I don't care what they get for Horvat. I think this team is just kind of done. The change behind the bench that's imminent, I think that the way that it's been handled's been really, really, really poor. There are some trying to defend the way this has been handled or just saying, oh, well, this is how it works. It's not. Going back to Gerard Gallant being fired by the Florida Panthers, it really isn't supposed to be run this way at all. So, yeah, Vancouver finds themselves at 28th, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're 29th this week. If Chicago keeps playing the way they are, and Vancouver keeps trending the direction they are, yeah, Vancouver could end up 29th next week. 27th, moving up 1 spot from last week, is San Jose. So for the Sharks, they lost tonight against Columbus, so how can they pass Vancouver? San Jose's been winning more regularly than Vancouver lately. They've looked better than Vancouver lately as well. There are a lot of positives I can pull from recent games with San Jose. With Vancouver, it's just all kind of fallen off. Vancouver was getting a lot of goals that were above the expected mark. San Jose really wasn't. Not at the same level as Vancouver. So San Jose is right now, I think, the better team of the two, but it's close, and that's kind of faint praise. Number 26, Dropping one spot from last week, the Ottawa Senators. The Sens not supposed to be in this row. The Sens are supposed to get better, and my expectation was that they would get better, and they're not. They're generally not. They got one win this week. They also had a couple of losses there, and it's just it continues to go in the wrong direction for Ottawa. They are going to be a team to watch at the deadline. Apparently, they might be acquiring talent rather than selling off talent at the deadline, which would be odd. It would just be really weird. Along the same lines as like San Jose kind of just holding and deciding, well, we can bounce back next year, which hopefully doesn't happen under Greer. But Dorian said before the season started that the rebuild was over, and it clearly isn't. So this is that magical time where you want to be out of that rebuild and you're not. And some teams don't really quite come out of it. Number 25 on the board, moving up one spot from last week, Montreal. Montreal's been playing better hockey lately. Now, I know they had that ugly game against Florida. I think that's a reflection of how well Florida's playing and just a disastrous game for Montreal. Both of those combined. Both can be true. One team can have a really good game and the other team can have a really bad game. But like tonight's win over Toronto shows, if you take them lightly, they'll beat you. And Montreal's winning enough games that if you're a Habs fan, you really want Bedard, they're winning enough games that they're pulling themselves away from some of these teams and they're lowering their chances. Doesn't mean they won't win and get that draft pick, but they are definitely lowering their chances with games like that win tonight over Toronto, while other teams on the board are still losing. So Montreal, we'll see what happens with them without Caulfield, but tonight Rem Pitlick looked pretty good, didn't he? I know, I'm a Pitlick stan, I might be the only one. I might be all alone. Number 24, staying in the same spot as last week, Detroit. Or as my French teacher used to say, Les Red Wings de Detroit. So, Detroit, it's been up and down for them. They play well one game, they play iffy, they have, it's just kind of all over. And when you have a young team that's kind of learning how to win, that's kind of how that works. It's not always pretty. Tonight was another example of that, where they played well in stretches against Philly, but Philly beat them, right? So they weren't able to solve Hart. They weren't quite able to tie it, and so they're staying in the same spot they were last week. I think 24th is a good spot. They're not in the bottom row right now, but they're not moving their way up either. Number 23, dropping 2 spots from last week, Philadelphia. For Philadelphia, it's been all over the place too, right? Like, they're seemingly pulling themselves into the hunt, or are they? Are they actually? Like, they've won, is it 9 out of 12 now? Something like that. Or it's 9 out of 13. It's somewhere in that region. And so for Philadelphia, they're winning enough that, again, if your opinion as a Flyers fan is, if we could get that number 1 draft pick, it could really turn us around. Players don't care. Players go out there to win. Players want to win games. They want to keep their jobs. They're not looking at the standings and say, okay, guys, we should lose tonight because we really want Bedard, don't we? That's not a thing. Players go out there, they play with pride. And Philadelphia, I think that's what we're seeing. We're also seeing a team that's well coached. So at the end of the year, we might be talking about a Philadelphia team that doesn't make the playoffs, but they play better than anyone expected and end up drafting somewhere in the 10 to 12 range rather than, potentially a top 5 draft pick. Which, if you have good scouts and you draft well, you can definitely overcome that. I would mention Detroit as an example of not having a number 1 draft pick, and yet they've acquired so many good prospects. Next on the board, number 22, and dropping 5 spots. 5 spots from last week, Buffalo. So Buffalo, they get the win over the Islanders, and it feels like things are starting to get better, right? So they get a couple of wins, but they also have suffered these other losses as well. And Buffalo's odds of making the playoffs seem to be kind of, in the ditch. Now, rightfully, Buffalo fans are calling me out because when I made my predictions for 2023, I said I thought Buffalo could get into the playoffs. So it's me. I apologize to Sabres fans everywhere. It's me. It might be my fault they haven't made the playoffs in over a decade. They haven't made the playoffs since the channel was created, so, right? It might very well be me. So maybe trading players and firing guys and blaming Eichel. Maybe it's me. So yeah, Buffalo's at number 22 this week. Hopefully they have a strong week and they move up next week. Number 21, moving up 1 spot from last week, the Blues. So for the Blues, they had an up and down week too. Losing against Chicago after the way they beat Nashville, this leaves me kind of wondering, so which Blues team is a real Blues team? The one that, and is that on Binnington? Is it on the defense? That's the whole other debate we've had about St. Louis all season. But is the real Blues team the one that beat Nashville and made it look relatively easy, or the one that couldn't beat Chicago? So they stay pretty much in the same spot. The loss against Chicago cost them. They would have made a healthy jump up the board this week, but yeah, that loss against Chicago really hurt them. Number 20 this week, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Pittsburgh. So we saw this week that Pittsburgh can beat Ottawa. Okay. Pittsburgh, there are some concerns with Pittsburgh at this point. Now, they could very well make the playoffs because the Islanders, it looks like, have kind of dropped off. So the Islanders are having problems with winning. Buffalo, as mentioned, they've been having problems with winning. So Pittsburgh should be able to hold on to that spot. Unless Philadelphia goes on an incredible run in the second half of the season, or Florida takes that spot. And Florida's playing like they want to take that spot. So Pittsburgh has got to get on a roll here. They have to win some games in consecutive fashion. Number 19 on the board, dropping 4 spots. 4 spots from last week, the New York Islanders. The Islanders, as stated, currently below Pittsburgh. If you want to switch Pittsburgh and the Islanders around, you absolutely can. I felt that dropping the Islanders 4 spots was enough for this week. But the Islanders, they're having some problems when it comes to just getting the wins when they need them. And so for the New York Islanders, finding themselves below the playoff line, that's not where you want to be. Again, Florida is... I think Florida's finally putting it together. I've been waiting a long time. I think Florida's finally putting it together, and that could be bad news for the Islanders and potentially for Pittsburgh. So the Islanders need to get things going. That loss against Carolina tonight, they had good moments. They had some good momentum at certain points of the game, but in the end, it's still a loss. Number 18, moving up 1 spot from last week, Nashville. Nashville's had an up and down week, so they don't really move much on the board. So you see a move up by Nashville, a move up 1 spot by St. Louis. These are directly attributable to Buffalo dropping. So for Nashville, overall a muddled week. They're not completely in the hunt for the playoff spot at this point. There's so many teams that are in there, and I think Colorado's decided it's theirs. But Nashville is still in the hunt. They're going to have to win some more games. If they can play and have comeback victories like tonight against LA, they have a chance. LA is one of those teams that maybe drops out of the top 3 in the Pacific. Maybe they end up being a wild card team that Nashville can pass. But we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening there. Or if we end up with the top 3, just imagine if there's a situation where the 3rd place team in the Pacific that makes the playoffs has a worse record than a team that misses the playoffs out of the Central. That's the kind of explosive fun that we could look forward to in the second half of the season. Number 17, and dropping 1 spot from last week, Calgary. Calgary today, this afternoon, they get the win over Tampa. Impressive win there, and it stopped them from falling further. For Calgary, they did not have a great week. Their week overall was not fantastic. So with that win, they keep pace with the Colorado Avalanche, but they really do have an issue right now. Edmonton's heating up. Edmonton looks like they're going to have another fantastic second half like they did last year. So now they're trying to bank on maybe Vegas falling down to them, maybe LA falling down to them, and yeah, that's tricky because they need to win more regularly. They're 4-3-2 now in the month of January. They're going to need to get more victories and avoid those regulation losses. So there's your bottom half of the board. Cool. All right, top half of the board now, number 16, and dropping 3 spots from last week, the LA Kings. So they're not in the second half of the board yet, but with the 2 losses they suffered Thursday and Saturday, it definitely causes them to drop down. Again, I made some adjustments today, and LA was one of those teams that when that game was done against Nashville, I adjusted them down. For LA, and again, it really does feel like beating a dead horse, but when it's a topic where people will say that, very often it's a topic that's being mentioned all the time for a reason. The LA Kings can score. They have a good defense. They don't right now have that number one goaltender that you look at and say, this guy I trust to get them the rest of the way through the season and get them in the playoffs. Now, in a playoff series, Jonathan Quick, he's A-okay. But to get there, they have to get wins more regularly. There are teams behind them that are winning a lot right now, or at least winning enough to make up ground on them. So LA really needs to start snapping to it here. All right. And then we get to number 15. Moving up, and I mean moving up. 8 spots from last week is Colorado. I got a kick out of, there was a comment on the channel today on last week's power rankings where I was talking about Colorado. And last week, Colorado dropped 4 spots. They were done. They had won 1 out of 8 games. There were 1-6-1 in the last 8. McKinnon came back. It didn't help. Nothing was working out for them. And I was like, yeah, they're done. They've won how many in a row right now? Yeah, so Colorado's back. There's no team that's yo-yoed so much in my power rankings as Colorado. And I think it's valid. I think right now Colorado looks like, I mean, they're more in Colorado because they're the biggest mover this week. Yeah, they're back. They're a playoff team. They're back. And it's funny because they are one of those teams that I've watched this year, and at points they've looked aimless and, yeah, no, this isn't happening. And then the next game, bam, it's back. And everything's just clicking. Tonight against Seattle was a really good chess match between two teams that could meet in a conference final. And if that's the case, at least for tonight, they were evenly matched. That was as evenly matched as a game can get, and that's fun to watch. Number 14, and the other big mover this week, moving up 6 spots from last week, Florida. The Florida Panthers, I do think they're putting it together, and they're going to make it difficult for other teams in the East. They have been underperforming. I've seen some saying that, well, you know, they're not that good and they lost too much. Losing Huberdeau and Weegar definitely affected this team negatively. Now, losing Ekblad out of today's game, if he ends up, you know, missing a lot of time, that's going to hurt them too. But in general, I think Florida's playing really well, and I think it's sustainable. The fact that they won today against Minnesota, a quality team who've been having a hard time themselves lately too, but Florida, they made it look relatively easy, and Lyon looked pretty darn good. So their goaltending's working out. Spencer Knight is doing his conditioning stint in the AHL, so however long Bobrovsky's going to be out, Knight shouldn't be in the minors for that long. He should be back up and playing, and we know Spencer Knight's a good goaltender. So, yeah, things look pretty good for Florida right now. What a difference a week can make. Number 13, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Washington. Now, in the event that Ovechkin missing the game tonight ends up being something more than just a one-game thing, don't be surprised if the Caps end up dropping precipitously on this board, because without Ovechkin, this team is completely different. And then you can get into the discussion then about whether or not he should be a Hart candidate. If not having Ovi in the lineup makes their offense as toothless as it was through a lot of that game tonight against Vegas, you can make that argument that Ovechkin, should he come in and you know, get this team into the playoffs, and when he's not in the lineup, that the team looks kind of lost out there offensively, you can make the argument he deserves a Hart, or at least consideration for said Hart trophy that probably is going to go to McDavid. McDavid's ridiculous. But yeah, Washington, not a great week for them this week, and so we'll see how things go for them. They did get the win over Arizona, but win over Arizona. Number 12. And dropping 4 spots from last week, Vegas. It would have been a bigger drop if they had lost tonight against the Caps, but they end up 1 spot ahead of the Caps on the power rankings. So there you go. For Vegas, without Stone, it makes a big difference. But tonight it felt like they started getting it back together. But is that them getting it back together? Is that the Caps trying to adjust to the loss of Ovechkin? There's a lot of variables there, right? So we'll see. I'm interested to see how Vegas does from here. The Golden Knights can be very entertaining to watch. They're a team that have been known to make very many comebacks in the third period. Very dangerous in the third period. If it's tied going to the third, they usually win it. This year's been a little different, but it feels like they're starting to get some of that mojo back with the win tonight. Again, we'll see. They do drop on the board, but I still think they're very dangerous, and they are still first in the division. Number 11, and dropping 5 spots from last week. I'll use this one. I wasn't going to use this one, but I'll use this one. Minnesota Wild. The Wild drop out of the top 10. A couple of losses this week. And the losses, it's not just that they lose, it's just how they looked in those losses. They didn't look good against Carolina, and then they didn't look good against Florida. And so it really feels like for Minnesota, it started moving the other direction, which is too bad because they did recover from that really slow start really well, and they were playing really, really solid hockey. But yeah, they're not in the top row anymore. That's also something that was commented today on last week's Power Rankings. Hey, why are they number 6? Because they're not. This is why I don't answer Power Rankings comments usually past 24 hours, because once Sunday's come and gone, teams have moved. I update them every day. So for the Wild, they're down to number 11. They're definitely trending in the wrong direction. And again, I don't care that a team loses. It's how. So I don't care if a team wins either. It's how. And in Minnesota's case, they weren't good enough for either of the last 2 games. Which, when you consider Florida and Carolina, they're quality opponents, but it shows that the Wild right now are a step behind those teams. All right, we move into the top 10. Moving up 4 spots from last week. The Oilers. Yep, the Oilers are back in the top 10. The game against the Canucks tonight, another example. And they were professionals about it. Like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins was asked about, the Boudreau thing and the Canucks and all that. And he's like, well, they're going to come after us in the third, so we're going to go out there and play hockey. And nothing else was expected of them. Edmonton, though, able to also tune out the noise, tune out any distractions for that game tonight, because I'm sure it was an odd atmosphere. And the Oilers are playing really well. What have they won? 6 in a row, something like that? They could very well end up winning that division. They could end up winning the Pacific. They're one of the higher rated Pacific teams on the board. Number 9, and same spot as last week, the Rangers. So the Rangers stay in 9th. I didn't see anything from them this week that caused them to drop or caused them to move up. The New York Rangers playoff team. Yep. Good goaltending, obviously. Can they score? Yep. Defense, pretty solid, probably underrated. And so the Rangers are in a position where I think that they're still a dark horse in the playoffs. I like their chances in the playoffs. I think that Shesterkin took them pretty far last year, and I think he'll take them a step further this year if everything falls in the right direction for New York. So we shall see. We're still almost a half a season away from that. Number 8 on the board, moving up 4 spots from last week, Dallas. So for the Dallas Stars, a solid week, really. Couple of shutouts mixed in there. Or have they had 3 shutouts in their last 4 games? I'm getting spoiled with the shutouts because I know there was a shutout. I think it's 3 shutouts in their last 4 games. That's pretty good. Yeah, because I remember there was a day where Dallas and Boston, neither of them allowed a goal. I was like, cool. And then Wedgwood had that shutout, and now Ottinger with another. Yeah, things are going pretty good. And it's a reflection of both solid goaltending and good defense. Heiskanen's been playing really well. I know people think he's overpaid. And when I see people saying Heiskanen's overpaid, my assumption in my mind is they don't watch him very much. This is a very solid team. And not only that, but Hintz has been out, and Tyler Seguin's playing the best hockey he has in years. So that's good news for Dallas as well, because Seguin and Ben paid a lot of money. This year, they're earning it. So, yeah, Dallas finds themselves back in the top row. Number 7, moving up 3 spots from last week, is New Jersey. So the Devils are back in the top row. I do have some concern about them going home. They have the best road record in the league. It's unmatched. At home, mediocre. At home, they are remarkably mediocre. The easy goals on the road are not easy at home. It's very similar to the storyline with Seattle. But encouraging for New Jersey fans might be that Seattle has started getting some points and some wins at home as well. So we'll see with New Jersey how things work out. Very successful road trip. And they made it look relatively easy. So they're back in the top row, which I had not expected a few weeks ago. It looked like New Jersey was just trending their way right out of the playoffs in a very difficult East, but they've definitely helped themselves with recent results. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from last week, Tampa. I could overreact, but it's a pretty brutal road trip. The one thing I will say is I did see there was one Tampa Bay fan that said, it's tough going across 3 time zones. As a fan of the Canucks, we know. There's many reasons why West Coast teams have had a hard time with road trips, and it's the travel, it's the amount of miles. So Tampa Bay this week, a lot of miles on the road. They struggled against both Calgary and Edmonton. Undisciplined in both games, and this is a problem with them on the road. We've had John Cooper talking about their not being disciplined, and it's not just penalties. It's when, it's how, it's when you've got somebody coming in trying to goad somebody else into a penalty and taking another one themselves. That kind of thing is something that Cooper's going to want to fix and make sure that doesn't happen, because in a playoff scenario that can be a complete disaster, right? So for Tampa Bay, I didn't move them down very much this week, but they did drop one spot. Number 5, moving up 3 spots from last week. It's the highest Seattle's been. So why does Seattle get up to 5th? Seattle gets up to 5th because they're starting to play well at home. Their road record, we know how good they are on the road. Now they're starting to play well at home, and so they end up 5th on the board. Shootout loss against Colorado. It's a shootout. I treat it like a tie. And shootout wins, again, treated like a tie. I don't move teams up the board generally when it's a shootout win. The funny thing is when I say that, people are like, well, what if it was Anaheim with a shootout win in Boston? Well, obviously that'd be different. But in general, shootouts, I just treat it like that's a tie, because the shootout is not a part of a regular hockey play, because if it was, we would have it in the playoffs. And if they ever go to shootouts in the playoffs, fans won't take that well. But at any rate, Seattle, the highest they've ever been on the board, in 5th. And so we'll see in coming weeks whether or not they stay there. But I was impressed with them tonight. Colorado, red hot, and Seattle kept up with them. Number 4, same spot as last week for Winnipeg. The Jets, that win tonight over Ottawa keeps them in 4th place. If they'd lost that game, odds are they're probably maybe 6th. Couple of rough games for them this week. They're a team that's definitely better at home than on the road. I know they won in Ottawa tonight, but they're definitely better at home than they are on the road. And just some minor things I think they need to figure out at the deadline. I don't think major surgery is needed. They are still one of the best teams in the West. That's an argument we can have at another time. There's videos I'll record that we'll post while I'm on vacation, about a week and a half from now. And so I may do some comparison videos and just put up all the stats and compare. Because there's very few games that are going to take place between when I'm on holidays and when I come back. I think it's like 6 games. So, and I mean 6 altogether. So less than half the league's even going to play. So there's no reason I shouldn't be able to do videos where I'm talking about teams, and if one game is off, it should make a difference. And Winnipeg would be a fun one to look at. And looking at other teams in the West and saying which one's really the best team in the West. Is it Winnipeg? Right now on the board they are, because the top 3 teams, all in the East. Number 3, dropping 1 spot from last week, Toronto. Toronto's still playing well. The game against Montreal tonight gets away from them, and big part of the reason they're in 3rd rather than in 2nd. But they had a good week. They didn't have a great week. They had a good week. So Toronto doesn't move down further than 3rd on the board. I can imagine there will be those who say they're too high. Sure. But Toronto's been playing well. Their goaltending from Samsonov's been good. And, of course, Murray having a rough start, bailed out by Samsonov coming in relief and playing well. And you have to have that. You have to have 2 goaltenders in today's NHL. Number 2 on the board, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Carolina. So the Carolina Hurricanes, absolutely 2nd place. They've got it back together. The win over the Islanders tonight wasn't really in any kind of doubt for quite a while in that game. I would say once they went up 3-2, I was like, okay, they're going to win. I didn't have any concern at that point that Carolina was going to blow it, especially with how well Anderson was playing. So Carolina, number 2 on the board. So who's number 1? I feel like I should grab a team that doesn't exist anymore. Like, I feel like I should take for number 1, I should just put up like a Quebec Nordiques and then just end the video there and have people saying, wait, what? But I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Because that'd be mean, that'd be cruel. And for Boston fans everywhere, they would not have the joy of knowing Boston's still first. Now, I'm going to say this. I know that people are going to say that They're peaking too soon, and I've said that they're due for some kind of a market correction where they're going to lose like 2 or 3 in a row. Now, the team that's first most often on my power rankings board might be seen as kind of being a jinx. However, last year I'm pretty sure Colorado was first on the board the most. And so Boston being first on the board tells you they're playing really, really well. And I'm impressed with the team overall, just top to bottom. I think it's been great. I think as much as Boston fans can't stand some of the moves Don Sweeney makes, they've worked. So that's the frustrating part. They've worked. And anything that might have backfired on them, it has not impacted the team on the ice this year. So we'll see if that continues to be the case. They're in on Bo Horvat. That's been talked about a lot and how that might work. And we'll see if that happens. And if it does, yay me, because he'd be going from one of my teams to one of my other teams. Perfect. And I think Bo Horvat would fit in perfectly with Boston, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I think Horvat would fit in with any team because he wins faceoffs. He is a really solid two-way forward. His defensive game is not what it was expected to be, but the offense is really good. He's having a career year, and he can play a ton, and he can take all your faceoffs. So having Bergeron and Horvat, anyways, just fantasy booking now. Boston's been pretty excellent. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.